Hi everybody, this is Alex with some feedback for you on your first week of class. In this short video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the quizzes, how they worked, how you all did on them, instructions for the film reviews, and then some feedback on your first round of essays, which were generally good, but there's definitely a few things that we want to make sure we're doing as we move forward with week 2 essays. So first, let's talk about the quizzes. The uh, class average was around a 70, so a little bit on the lower side. I'm sure everyone wants to do a little bit better on these. Um, the first question we won't dwell too long on. Everyone seemed to have gotten that right. Pretty easy, just a matter of making sure you're on top of the first reading. But then a question that's a little bit more about the understanding of the reading rather than what's in it. This concept of cultural hegemony, it's really central to what Gutman's argument is about how sports are either a tool of imperialism or a tool of resisting imperialism. And the two questions that, or the two options that people picked when they were incorrect were these: modern sports have always been a tool used by powerful colonizers, or they've never been a tool of cultural imperialism. And I was glad to see most of you got this right, but if you got it wrong, it's something to circle back to, because it's really at the heart of one of the tensions that's going to play throughout the class. Are sports political? Are they good or bad in certain political senses? Can they be used politically? Do they harm certain groups and benefit others? There's a complexity to that question and a tension in that question that cultural hegemony is really useful for thinking through. How can this thing that was being imposed on other people by colonizers, eventually taken up by those very same colonial subjects explicitly as acts of resistance? How can it be both at the same time? And that paradox, as it were, and that tension is something that's central to modern sports, and it's something, like I said, it's gonna be coming up throughout the class in different settings and different sports. The third question here, again, this is probably more on the reading comprehension side. Uh, you want to make sure you're paying close attention to what the central arguments are of each author and what animates those arguments, what kind of evidence they're drawing on, and what kinds of points they're making. And while federal funds for stadiums are something we'll talk about later in the class, it's not the correct answer for the Hardy reading. It's really free time that he's harping on as an important part of the urban context of sports growing. And then I want to spend some time on this fourth question, or just make a simple point. Really, most of you got this right, but it came up in almost none of the essays. So use these quizzes as a way to tip yourself off to how you should outline your essay. If there is one question about a reading in the quiz, then there's a good chance that that's a central point of the reading that I wanted to make sure you picked up on. So when you start to think through what you should say about that reading and how you should tie that reading into the answer or the prompt, you know, make a note of what that question was asking you. So if most of you, if the overwhelming majority of the class got muscular Christianity and the cult of domesticity correct, then it should have come up in the portions of your essay responses where you talked about gendered ideas. The fifth question is probably a little bit more thinking through what authors mean, what the point of the reading is, rather than just pure reading comprehension of terms or what it's about. The fifth question is: Kant describes how female physical educators celebrated women's physical freedom and athletic enjoyment, but this went hand in hand with what? And this was preserving gender differences. And this is, again, a central tension that many of you glossed over in your readings. This was something that was really a missed opportunity, both on how race shaped sports in the United States and how concepts of gender shaped sports in the United States that not enough of you really dug into in your essays. And this is a good example on the gender side of how there's a complicated tension here, right? More women are participating in sports. It sometimes goes hand in hand with a sort of politics that looks at women's liberation from traditional kinds of gender roles. but there's only certain kinds of room for maneuver. So what I mean by that is it's okay to disrupt the meaning of what it is to be a woman in some senses in these sporting spaces, but on other things there's not a questioning of the traditional gender roles of women, right? This is still about preserving the female body as a place for reproduction, right? That's paramount to what is appropriate for women's sports and what's inappropriate for women's sports, and it's also central about their role as mothers that their participation in sports is always being weighed against. So it was about bucking the trend in some ways, but some of you vastly overstate that in your essays, and you really should pick up in the Borsch reading and in the Kahn reading how much tension there is around this space. Yes, women are participating more in sports, but that does not go hand in hand with kind of total female emancipation or even necessarily political rights, right? It's also about preserving gender differences. So those are a few things that I wanted to point to in the quizzes. Many of you have asked some questions about the film review. So on the film review, in your surveys, you identified what your top choice was. And in the responses, there's enough of an even spread that you can all go with your first choice, okay? So plan on doing a review of the film that was your first choice in the survey response. So the way that that actually works is it's good that most of you, or actually a good chunk of you, picked A League of Their Own as your film, and that's this coming week's week two's film that you have to review. So film reviews are due by 5 p.m. on the Saturday of the week that you were assigned. For example, the film reviews for week 2 are due Saturday, May 28th by 5 p.m. So turn in your film review on the D2L Dropbox. Let me just make sure here. Saturday, the 27th. This is an old date here, so this should be Saturday, May 27th. That'll be correct on the schedule page. So let's just double check that. Yes, the week 2 film is A League of Their Own, and I'll add in here due by 5 p.m. on Saturday. So each week that you pick your film, that Saturday of that week is when it's due. So for a good chunk of you, you have your first film review due this Saturday. So again, you have the film that you picked as your top choice. Go on the schedule page and find which week that film corresponds to. Pony Excess was, I think, probably the most second popular one, and Red Army was pretty popular. Dare to Dream was pretty popular as well. That's a week 7 one. So those are all due on the Saturdays of those weeks. So take a look at each week and the due dates for the film reviews. The last thing I wanted to talk about was your essays. So many of you did a pretty decent job of laying out the basic issues in each of the readings, but the answers to the prompt, they came up short in a lot of ways. And I really want you to be thinking hard about how, as you read the materials for the class and how, as you take the quiz on those reading materials, those present opportunities for you to answer the prompt directly. So make sure when you start this week's reading materials, that you have this section of the writing prompt instructions in front of you, and that you also have the writing prompt itself for that week in front of you, and take notes on the question of that week as you move through the reading. And then when you take that quiz, you can even look at the quiz, you can start to form the outline of your essay. So use the quizzes as clues. Include lots of detail and analysis and examples of what you mean. Don't just summarize and speak in generalities. Many of you in your essays kind of vaguely described what each reading was about, but then your analysis was completely disconnected from the readings. You were talking about maybe a current event or something that you feel about a certain sport. And those are okay to bring in, and sometimes they're really strong points to bring in, but they have to be tied to some kind of analysis that's directly answering the prompt that shows me that A, you've done the readings, and B, you have something to say about the readings and you can speak intelligently about what the author is trying to do and what that means for understanding of race in basketball or money in football. These are issues that are going to be coming up throughout the class that build on each other chronologically as we move through time as well. So, include lots of detail and analysis, what more than summarizing, and just speaking in generalities. Also, probably the most important point I have to make about the essays, answer the entire prompt and draw on the readings. So the writing prompts aren't directed at kind of your general knowledge that you brought into the class, although that may come in handy at some points in the class, and you're absolutely feel free to bring it up in essays where it's relevant. But the writing prompts are designed to ask the question, did you do the readings? Do you understand the readings? And can you think through how the readings are helping you answer a particular kind of question? So keep those things in mind as we move into the second week. If you have any questions, please reach out and email us. A number of you have directed some grading questions at me. David Golofsky is going to be doing a bulk of the grading, so I'm happy to entertain those questions. In most cases, I'm going to be copying him in on that message and getting his response to you as well. So if it's grading related, especially on this week's round of grading, which you should be getting today, Monday, May 22nd, then David Golofsky is going to be one that you want to contact directly. Good luck with the second week, and let us know if you have any questions.